Picture a town where the streets are clean, the houses welcoming, and neighbors greet each other by name. A place where kids play freely on the sidewalks, and doors are rarely locked at night. This is Romeoville, Illinois, or at least, that's how everyone saw it. In this quiet community, the Bartolomei family was the picture of American perfection. Alberto, the hard-working father, Zoraida, the devoted mother, and their 2 teenage children, full of promise and dreams. They were the kind of family that made you believe the American dream was still attainable. But behind the neatly drawn curtains and the smiles in family photos, dark secrets were about to surface. On a single September night, the veil of normalcy was brutally torn away, leaving an entire community in shock and searching for answers. What happened at 309 Dream Street? How did a seemingly perfect family become the epicenter of a tragedy that would shake the foundations of an entire town? Join us for this harrowing story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the events that led to a tragic night, a night of shattered lives. You know the type of person whose name alone makes you think, here comes trouble? Well, that was Nathaniel. Nathaniel was in his early 30s, with a history that wouldn't go unnoticed. His hands, calloused not from honest work but from life's hard knocks, told stories of difficult times. From a young age, he had a knack for getting into trouble. He wasn't inherently bad, but the choices he made along the way led him to cross the line of legality more times than he'd like to admit. Nathaniel's life was always a whirlwind of unexpected events. He grew up in a rough neighborhood, where opportunities were scarce and temptations were plentiful. Friends who weren't exactly good influences and situations that put him in constant conflict with the law. He'd been in fights, petty thefts, and over time, his rap sheet began to grow. It wasn't long before the authorities started keeping an eye on him. One of Nathaniel's biggest issues was his relationship with guns. Despite being prohibited from owning any firearms due to his troubled past, he always seemed to find a way around the rules. Maybe it was the allure of the power a gun represented, or perhaps it was just the adrenaline rush of living on the edge. The fact is, even without legal permission, Nathaniel always kept a gun nearby, a choice that would eventually lead to disastrous consequences. Nathaniel was the kind of guy who always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Even when he tried to stay out of trouble, it seemed to follow him. It was like a cloud of bad luck hung over him, attracting complicated situations like a magnet. And unfortunately, this would put him on a collision course with the Bartolomei family. Zoraida, with her sweet demeanor and welcoming eyes, had become involved in an affair with none other than Nathaniel Huey Jr. Yes, the same Nathaniel with the complicated past who seemed to attract trouble like a magnet. What started as an innocent friendship quickly developed into something deeper. Perhaps it was the mystery surrounding Nathaniel or the thrill of something forbidden that drew her in. The fact is, Zoraida found herself entangled in a relationship that seemed straight out of a dramatic screenplay. For Zoraida, Nathaniel represented an escape from her daily routine, a break from the role of perfect wife and mother she felt she had to play all the time. It was like living in a parallel world where the rules of everyday life didn't apply. But at the same time, she knew she was playing with fire. Each clandestine meeting, each secretly exchanged message, added a little more tension to an already volatile situation. Nathaniel, in turn, was captivated by Zoraida. He saw in her a light that brightened his dark days. To him, Zoraida was a safe harbor amidst the chaos of his life. But unlike Zoraida, he didn't have the same knack for hiding his emotions. Friends and acquaintances began to notice the change in his behavior, and it wasn't long before rumors started to spread. It was as if a storm was brewing on the horizon, invisible to everyone except those directly involved. And like any good storm, when it finally arrived, it promised to leave a trail of destruction in its wake. Zoraida knew she was playing a dangerous game, but the thrill of the moment seemed to override any sense of impending danger. And so, amidst whispered secrets and furtive encounters, the lives of the Bartolomeis and Nathaniel were about to collide in an inevitable and catastrophic way. Ermalinda Palomo, a woman deeply in love, was engaged to Nathaniel Huey Jr. They had been together for a while, and Ermalinda was eager to start a new life with him. She dreamed of the white dress, the perfect ceremony, and a happy life together. Everything seemed to be going well until the rug was pulled out from under her. Ermalinda's world turned upside down when she discovered Nathaniel was having an affair with Zoraida Bartolomei. Can you imagine the shock and pain she felt at that moment? Her heart shattered into a million pieces. She spent sleepless nights, reliving every moment of their relationship, trying to understand how she missed the signs. It was as if a horror movie was playing on repeat inside her head. That betrayal was a devastating blow, and Ermalinda found herself in a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion, all the feelings mixed together, and she didn't know what to do. Many people, finding themselves in such a situation, would try to move on, leave the past behind, and start over. But Ermalinda wasn't ready to let that happen so easily. Amidst the pain and anger, Ermalinda had an idea. A dark idea, fueled by betrayal and a thirst for revenge. She began to plan a way to make Nathaniel pay for his actions. It wasn't a good idea, not by a long shot, but in the heat of the moment, it seemed like the only way to cope with the betrayal. Ermalinda decided that instead of confronting Nathaniel directly, she would devise a plan to manipulate the situation to her advantage. A scheme that would bring unimaginable consequences for everyone involved. And so, with a broken heart and a mind consumed by thoughts of revenge, Ermalinda began to put her plan into action. What she didn't know was that this decision would trigger a series of events that would change their lives forever. In her pain and desperation, Ermalinda began to conceive a plan that seemed straight out of a psychological thriller. She decided to use social media as her weapon. In a world where digital connections can be as powerful as real ones, Ermalinda saw an opportunity. She created fake profiles, carefully crafted, each with its own story and personality. They were like characters in a drama only she knew. These profiles were meticulously designed to attract Nathaniel's attention. Each woman she created seemed to have a sudden and intense interest in him. The messages were subtle at first, innocent compliments, casual comments, but they became more insistent and suggestive over time. Ermalinda knew how to play on Nathaniel's insecurities. She knew his weaknesses and used that knowledge to manipulate his emotions. Ermalinda's goal was clear. She wanted Nathaniel to experience the same emotional turmoil she felt when she discovered his betrayal. She wanted him to become obsessed, to question every interaction, every glance. The idea was to plant the seed of doubt and jealousy, making him believe he was constantly being watched and desired by others. As the online interactions intensified, Nathaniel began to show signs of unease. He was in a state of growing confusion, trying to figure out who these women were and why they were so interested in him. Ermalinda watched from afar, observing her plan taking shape, but not realizing she was playing an extremely dangerous game. While Ermalinda maintained her facade, the atmosphere between her and Nathaniel began to shift. He was more distracted, more anxious, and it created a palpable tension in the air. It was as if a storm was brewing, about to erupt at any moment. And so, Ermalinda's plan ran its course, leading everyone involved toward an outcome no one could foresee. By manipulating Nathaniel's emotions through a web of lies and illusions, Ermalinda was sowing the seeds of a storm that could destroy everything around her. Still hurting from Nathaniel's betrayal, Ermalinda Palomo decided to escalate her plan. What began as fake social media profiles now evolved into an even more elaborate scheme. Posing as these fictitious women, Ermalinda began sending messages to Nathaniel. But these weren't ordinary messages. These women talked about how they were interested in Nathaniel, but more than that, they insinuated that Alberto, Zoraida's husband, was also the center of their attention. The messages were filled with provocative details, suggesting encounters and exchanged glances between these fabricated women and Alberto. The words were carefully chosen to ignite the flames of jealousy in Nathaniel. She described scenes where Alberto seemed to be enjoying himself with these women, even though it was all pure fiction. Ermalinda's intention was clear. She wanted Nathaniel to see Alberto as a rival, someone trying to steal not only his attention but also Zoraida's. Nathaniel, already vulnerable and emotionally unstable, fell into Ermalinda's trap. He started to believe the stories he was receiving. To him, each message was a confirmation of his worst suspicions. The idea that Alberto could be involved with other women besides Zoraida began to consume his thoughts. He felt betrayed and deceived, not only by Zoraida but now also by this new threat that was emerging. With each message, Nathaniel became more obsessed. He began to watch Alberto and Zoraida more closely, looking for signs that would confirm his suspicions. The tension was thick in the air, and paranoia began to take hold. Nathaniel's life was becoming chaotic, and he was about to make decisions that would irreversibly change the course of history. Ermalinda, meanwhile, watched everything from afar. For her, each step Nathaniel took toward the emotional abyss was a small victory. But what she couldn't predict was how far this obsession would take Nathaniel and how it would impact everyone around them. Ermalinda's plan, though ingenious, was snowballing into a cascade of unimaginable consequences. What started as an attempt at revenge was about to unleash a series of events that no one could stop. But, on one fateful day, she crossed a dangerous line. So, what would you do in Ermalinda's shoes? Is revenge the best answer to betrayal, or do you think she should have taken a different path? Leave your thoughts in the comments about this story full of twists and turns and emotions. In her quest for revenge, Ermalinda sent a message that changed everything. This time, the story she fabricated was even more sinister, filled with details that would make anyone stop and think. She suggested that Alberto, Zoraida's husband, was planning something terrible, not just against Nathaniel, but against Zoraida and her children as well. It was a cruel and calculated lie designed to throw Nathaniel into a state of absolute panic. In the message, Ermalinda described a supposed conversation she overheard between Alberto and a friend. They were allegedly planning a mysterious trip, insinuating that something bad could happen to Zoraida and the children during that time. The idea was to make Nathaniel believe that Alberto wasn't just a romantic rival but a direct threat to the safety of his lover and her kids. For Nathaniel, this message was the final straw. He was already emotionally shaken by the previous messages, but this new information pushed him over the edge. The thought that Zoraida and her children could be in danger because of Alberto sparked a sense of urgency and desperation in him. Nathaniel couldn't think straight, and every thought seemed to fuel his paranoia. From that moment on, Nathaniel became obsessed with the idea of protecting Zoraida and the children from Alberto. He convinced himself that he needed to act quickly to prevent a tragedy. This constant state of alert led him to make rash decisions, and he began to formulate a plan to confront Alberto. What he didn't realize was that he was being manipulated the entire time, and that this message was just a fabrication created by Ermalinda to feed his insecurities. As Nathaniel spiraled into a frenzy, Ermalinda watched from afar, satisfied with the chaos her message had unleashed. But, as often happens with revenge-fueled plans, she underestimated the consequences of her actions. What seemed like simple manipulation had transformed into a dangerous and uncontrollable situation. Thus, we arrive at a crucial point in the story, where impulsive actions and carefully planned manipulations collide, leading to an outcome no one could have predicted. In the quiet early morning hours of September 17, 2023, while most homes in Romeoville were nestled in peaceful slumber, Nathaniel Huey Jr. was awake, battling his own demons. The string of manipulative messages had taken their toll, and he was consumed by a mixture of fear and rage. At that moment, Nathaniel felt he needed to act to protect Zoraida and her children from a threat that, in reality, didn't exist, but in his mind, seemed as real as the air he breathed. In a state of desperation and confusion, Nathaniel made a decision that would forever alter the course of events. He picked up weapons he legally shouldn't have had access to, given his troubled past and prohibitions against owning them. However, those rules seemed irrelevant in that critical moment. For him, it was a matter of life or death, and he was determined to save his lover and the children. He drove to the Bartolomei home, his heart pounding, his mind racing. The night was dark, the streets silent except for the hum of his car engine. Nathaniel felt like a warrior heading into an unavoidable battle. At that moment, he was so consumed by his emotions that he couldn't distinguish reality from the illusion that had been created for him. Arriving at the house, Nathaniel paused for a moment, trying to gather the courage for what he was about to do. The lights were off, and everything seemed calm, but inside him, a storm raged. He believed he needed to act fast, that every second counted. Weapons in hand, he entered the house, driven by an irrational impulse. What followed was a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. In his distorted mind, Nathaniel was there to protect, but his actions resulted in unspeakable horror. The house, once a home filled with life and joy, transformed into a scene of chaos and destruction. In a matter of minutes, the lives of the Bartolomeis were irrevocably altered. The sound of gunshots echoed through the neighborhood, shattering the night silence. Frightened neighbors called the police, but by the time authorities arrived, it was too late. What they found was a devastating scene, a family destroyed by a series of events that began with jealousy and manipulation. Nathaniel's reckless act left an indelible mark on the Romeoville community. What started as a plan of manipulation ended in a tragedy no one could have foreseen. This episode serves as a grim reminder of how dangerous unchecked emotions and manipulation can be. And so, the story of the Bartolomeis and Nathaniel reaches a point of no return, where the consequences of human actions are painfully evident. The next morning, the sun rose over Romeoville, but the usual brightness of that quiet town was about to be overshadowed by some of the most tragic news its residents had ever received. It was an ordinary day for many, as they prepared for their daily routines, until an urgent call came into the local police emergency dispatch. On the other end of the line, a trembling voice reported sounds of gunshots coming from the Bartolomei home during the night. Immediately, police sirens pierced the calm morning air, racing towards the Bartolomei family's address. Upon arrival, officers found the door slightly ajar, a sign that something terrible had happened. Cautiously, they entered the house, not knowing exactly what they would find, but prepared for the worst. What they discovered was a scene that would forever be etched in their memories. The house, once full of life and joy, was now submerged in a disturbing silence. Alberto, Zoraida, and their two teenage children were lifeless, victims of an act of inexplicable violence. The faces that had often been seen smiling and sharing moments of happiness now told a story of terror and loss. News of the incident spread rapidly through the community like a shockwave. Incredulous neighbors gathered in the streets, trying to understand how such a great tragedy could have happened right under their noses. The Bartolomei family was known and loved by everyone, and the idea that they could have been the target of such violence was simply inconceivable. The police immediately launched an investigation, working tirelessly to piece together a complex and painful puzzle. Meanwhile, the Romeoville community was in mourning, trying to cope with the loss of a family that represented the heart of their neighborhood. Schools, churches, and workplaces became meeting points for people to share their memories and seek support from one another. This tragic event brought to light a series of unanswered questions. How could something so horrific happen in such a peaceful town? What were the motivations behind such a brutal act? And, most importantly, how could they ensure that something like this never happened again? As the days passed, the community remained united, determined to honor the memory of the Bartolomeis and seek justice for them. After the tragic discovery at the Bartolomei home, the Romeoville police launched an intense operation to capture Nathaniel Huey Jr., the prime suspect in this shocking crime. The community was on high alert, and the police department knew they needed to act swiftly to prevent Nathaniel from harming anyone else or disappearing without a trace. The first few hours were critical. Investigators and police officers assembled in a coordinated operation, reviewing evidence and witness statements to build a profile of the suspect. They knew Nathaniel had a troubled history and illegally possessed firearms, but the real motivation behind his actions remained a mystery. What could have driven Nathaniel to commit such a brutal act against the Bartolomei family? Based on the available information, the police issued an arrest warrant for Nathaniel and quickly disseminated his photo and description to search teams and local television stations. The community, still reeling from the tragedy, was urged to remain vigilant and report any sightings or information that could aid in Nathaniel's capture. Meanwhile, specialized teams scoured the city and surrounding areas, including parks, parking lots, and places where Nathaniel might be hiding. Helicopters hovered overhead, and K-9 units were deployed to track any sign of the suspect. The search took on significant proportions, with the involvement of state and federal authorities, reflecting the gravity of the situation. Despite the concentrated efforts, Nathaniel seemed to have vanished without a trace, further escalating the tension among investigators. Questions lingered. Where could he be? Did he have accomplices? And most importantly, what had led him to commit such an atrocity? The town of Romeoville was united in its determination to see justice served. People gathered at vigils, not only to mourn the loss of the Bartolomeis but also to show solidarity and support for the authorities in their search for Nathaniel. The atmosphere was one of sadness, but also of hope and resilience. With the town of Romeoville still in shock from the tragedy that befell the Bartolomei family, the search for Nathaniel Huey Jr. continued with urgency and determination. Hours passed slowly as police teams battled uncertainty and the fear that Nathaniel might strike again. But then, a crucial lead emerged, changing the course of the investigation. With access to Nathaniel's devices, investigators began piecing together the puzzle of messages and interactions that led him to that fateful night. The complexity of the case started to emerge, revealing not only Nathaniel's emotional fragility but also the web of lies that had been spun around him. The community, which initially saw Nathaniel as the villain, began to grasp the depth of the human tragedy involved. Ermalinda, though she hadn't pulled the trigger, had played a crucial role in catalyzing the events that led to the final confrontation. Her manipulation had fueled Nathaniel's paranoia, leading him down a path of no return. With Nathaniel Huey Jr. out of the picture, the Romeoville police turned their attention to understanding what led to such a devastating tragedy. The investigators were determined to piece together this complex puzzle, and what they uncovered was a plot filled with intrigue and manipulation that no one could have predicted. As they sifted through Nathaniel's electronic devices, detectives began to find a series of cryptic messages that didn't make sense at first glance. However, as they delved deeper, a disturbing narrative started to emerge. They discovered that Nathaniel had been manipulated through fake social media profiles, all created by Ermalinda, his own fiancée. Ermalinda, in her pain over Nathaniel's betrayal with Zoraida, had orchestrated a meticulous plan to incite jealousy and paranoia in Nathaniel. She created these fake profiles, posing as other women, and fed Nathaniel's already unstable mind with a constant stream of lies. The messages insinuated that Alberto, Zoraida's husband, was involved in a sinister plot that threatened Zoraida and the children, leading Nathaniel to believe he needed to act to protect them. What the investigators uncovered was a twisted motive that put all the events into perspective. Ermalinda hadn't intended for things to go so far, but her actions triggered a chain reaction that culminated in tragedy. It was a dangerous game of emotional manipulation that spiraled out of her control. With each new discovery, the puzzle of what truly happened on that fateful night became clearer. Investigators realized that Nathaniel, despite his violent actions, was also a victim of circumstance. He had been driven to a state of extreme paranoia by someone he loved and trusted, someone who knew his vulnerabilities and used them against him. The Romeoville community, upon learning of these revelations, was shocked to realize that the crime wasn't just a senseless act of violence but the result of a series of tragic events and misunderstandings. The story of Nathaniel, Zoraida, Alberto, and Ermalinda served as a powerful reminder of the devastating consequences that can arise from emotional pain and lack of communication. The investigators, now with a clear understanding of what led to the tragedy, worked to ensure that justice was served. Although nothing could bring back the Bartolomeis, the truth about what happened helped the community begin to heal. Has this story of passion, jealousy, and tragedy impacted you? Leave a like to show you understand the devastating power of manipulation and unchecked emotions. As the investigation progressed, the focus shifted to Ermalinda Palomo, Nathaniel Huey Jr.'s fiancé and the central figure in this tragic puzzle. Armed with the evidence found on Nathaniel's devices, investigators summoned Ermalinda for an interrogation that promised to be revealing. In the cold, impersonal interrogation room, Ermalinda sat across from the detectives. The air was thick with tension as the investigators began to unravel the web of lies she had woven. Initially, Ermalinda tried to maintain her composure, denying any involvement in the case. But as the detectives presented piece after piece of evidence, her facade began to crumble. Hours passed, and little by little, the truth began to surface. With a mixture of remorse and defiance in her eyes, Ermalinda finally confessed to creating the fake social media profiles. She described, with a chilling detachment that shocked even the most seasoned investigators, how she had meticulously planned every detail of her manipulation. Ermalinda revealed how she had studied Nathaniel's insecurities, using her intimate knowledge of him to craft messages that would push him to the brink. She explained how she carefully chose each word, each insinuation, with the goal of inflaming Nathaniel's jealousy and paranoia. The level of planning was frightening. She had created detailed schedules for her posts, studied psychology to understand how best to manipulate Nathaniel's emotions, and even crafted complete personas for each of the fake profiles. The detectives listened as Ermalinda described how she watched Nathaniel's behavior change day by day, satisfied with the success of her plan. She admitted that her initial goal was simply to make Nathaniel feel the pain of the betrayal she had experienced, but things had spiraled out of control. What shocked the police the most was Ermalinda's apparent initial lack of remorse. She spoke of her actions with a clarity and emotional detachment that were unsettling. It was only when confronted with the ultimate consequences of her actions, the deaths of the Bartolomei family and Nathaniel, that reality seemed to finally sink in. As the interrogation drew to a close, the room was filled with a heavy atmosphere. The investigators, accustomed to dealing with the darkest aspects of human nature, were visibly shaken by the coldness and calculation behind Ermalinda's actions. This revelation shed new light on the entire tragedy. What initially appeared to be a senseless act of violence was now revealed to be the result of a meticulous plan gone horribly wrong. Ermalinda's story served as a stark reminder of the destructive power that unresolved emotions and manipulation can wield. As the police prepared charges against Ermalinda, the Romeoville community struggled to process this new information. The tragedy that had shaken their town now gained additional layers of complexity and sadness. As the truth about the tragedy unraveled, the small town of Romeoville found itself shrouded in a blanket of deep mourning. Homes that once echoed with laughter and conversation were now silent. The streets seemed emptier, each corner carrying an invisible weight of sadness and introspection. The community, once united by bonds of friendship and neighborliness, was now united by shared grief. Neighbors and friends of the Bartolomei family gathered for candlelight vigils, seeking solace in one another and trying to find meaning in a situation that seemed so cruel and unfair. The soft sounds of prayers and shared memories filled the night air, creating a tapestry of support and solidarity that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Schools, churches, and workplaces became sanctuaries where people could express their grief and bewilderment. Counselors and community leaders were available to offer emotional support as residents tried to process the impact of this act of violence on their town, which had been seen as an oasis of tranquility. Conversations in the town squares and coffee shops revolved around one inevitable question: how could something like this happen here? For many, Romeoville was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where doors were left unlocked, and children played freely in the streets. But now, that sense of security had been shattered, and people began to question how well they truly knew their neighbors. Friendships were tested, and suspicious glances began to appear in a community that was once united. There was a growing desire to better understand those who lived around them, to rebuild the trust that had been broken. This tragedy served as a wake-up call to the importance of open dialogue and building stronger bonds among residents. Amidst this collective grief, stories of kindness and resilience emerged, warming hearts. Neighbors looked out for one another, offering support to those in need, bringing meals, or simply being present. This was the Romeoville everyone knew and loved, a community that, despite the pain, refused to be defined by an isolated act of violence. As the town navigated this period of mourning and reflection, hope began to emerge slowly, like the soft light of dawn after a long night. There was a growing understanding that, although they couldn't change the past, they could work together to build a safer, more united future. Stay with us as we continue to explore the lessons learned and the path to healing that this resilient community is forging. This documentary isn't just about a tragedy. It's about the strength of a people determined to rise again, stronger and more united than ever.